Welcome to the Bitcoin Unlimited podcast. I'm John Moriarty, and for this episode, I'm joined by Imaginary Username. Today, we'll be talking about the Bitcoin Cash fundraising tool called Flipstarter. Imaginary, thank you for joining me.
Hi, this is Imaginary Username.
So, for our viewers who don't know who you are, could you give us an idea of what it is you do in the Bitcoin Cash ecosystem?
Okay, so right now I do a bunch of different things regarding Bitcoin Cash Node. That is what I do most of these days. I coordinate releases. I run some infrastructure, and um, I help review documentations, among other things. And I also coordinate ecosystem actors in other places. And aside from this, I also write and participate in some other hopefully valuable things to the Bitcoin Cash ecosystem, such as the main subject of today's talk, Flipstarter, and also Hedge, which I participated in its design and among other things. So yeah.
Thanks very much. So yeah, let's start with what Flipstarter is, and functionally, I guess it's similar to the mainstream fundraising platform Kickstarter, isn't it?
Yes, you can probably already tell from the name. So essentially, it is a platform where someone who's trying to fundraise for a specific project would have a goal and say that, okay, if I can if I can get enough people to pledge me this amount of funds, I am going to use the entirety of this funds for a specific project or goal that I tell you I'm going to do. Please pledge to the project. And so people can pledge to it. But unlike traditional donations, maybe you go ahead and donate and then people don't follow you, and then the guy who's trying to do the project gets $50 perhaps, and then he was like, oh, okay, the drive ended, I got $50. That's totally not enough to do the project. What am I going to do with it? So it's a hassle to return. So okay, I guess I will go buy beer. I guess that's what happens. But no, that's not going to happen with either Kickstarter or Flipstarter. The project is only funded if the goal is reached, and hence, because the goal is reached, the guy doing the drive have an obligation to do the project with it. If it's not completed, if the goal is not reached, then the funds are returned to the pledges.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that of course the person receiving the donations, in the case where they don't get fully funded and it's not all or nothing, they say, darn, I didn't raise enough money. But it's just as big a problem for the people who donate, who then can't know for sure whether or not whatever project they wanted to support is actually going to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, sometimes for some purposes it works, for example, if we want to help a guy, the guy who says that he's starving, any amount would help, then yeah, sure, you give him $20, he will buy $20 of food, that totally works. But it works a lot less well for, specific projects that have specific plans. So in this cases, this works, yeah, as you said, it works a lot better for both the guy putting up the campaign and the guy who pledges. The guy putting up the campaign, well, if the goal is not reached, then it's not reached. Then I can, just go do something else with my time, I guess. Yeah.
And Flipstarter and Kickstarter are relatively recent, but this idea, generally speaking, of only having pledged funds actually used or transferred from the pledger to the receiver if the full amount is reached, that's not a new idea, though, is it?
That does not seem to be a new idea. It has been around for a while, although I tried to do a little research on exactly when that idea started, and I couldn't actually find the precise point when it started. But it's been around for a while, and it's an idea that's especially favored for by libertarians in particular, because because it allows people to collaboratively fund something specific and hold it accountable.
Sure, and I guess if we want to bring in the fancy words, the more general term for something like this is assurance contract, right?
Exactly.
And there are game theoretical implications, if you'll excuse my air quotes, but I think it's clear that there is demand for something like this, isn't there? It's not something that sort of came out of the blue.
Yeah. I mean, even before this whole Flipstarter and building things on top of Bitcoin thing, the Kickstarter model demonstrated that there is demand for this. There are a lot of occasions when people want something specific to happen, but they are not going to pay for it alone. Sometimes, because in terms of game theoreticals, there are a lot of times when contributing to something actually fits your self-interest because you really want that thing to happen. You really want that thing to happen. It is in your self-interest, but you can't pay for the entirety of it. That is that will be too expensive and will no longer be in your self-interest. But if a bunch of people who all benefit from it collectively pay for it, then hey, suddenly it's worth it. It's the thing happening is worth $20 to everyone, and then everyone only pay $10 for it. Hey, that's then it works. That it works out. It's totally worth it.
And it's interesting that the words we use a lot of times. People giving to flip starters, people use the word donation, but it's not necessarily donation, is it? It's just a pledge.
Yeah. So people use the term interchangeably, but I think it's slightly misleading to call it donations because it's a pledge, it's a commitment you put down the money and say that okay, I'm gonna go through with it if everyone else also go through with it, with theirs. But it unlike how people traditionally understand donations, which is that okay, I throw some donations down this way, and I will not see that money back again. That's not the case. A pledge is slightly more nuanced.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about how Flipstarter does this, because of course Kickstarter already exists. So what is it about Flipstarter besides just using Bitcoin Cash that makes it valuable, and how does that happen on a more technical level?
Right. Okay. So Kickstarter obviously operates on a trust-based model, which is fairly easy. You already have your money in custody of the banks anyway, so the bank together with Kickstarter, you trust both of them to manage your money basically. And so when you pledge, those two guys say, okay, we who are already in custody of your money will transfer it to the project if the whole fundraising goes through. That's the trust-based model. In terms of Bitcoin, it is actually the model we are currently using. We are trying to come up with more sophisticated models, but the way we are currently doing is a clever legacy of the Satoshi design of Bitcoin transactions that was later rediscovered and first the first attempt to exploit it, as far as we can tell, was Mike Hearn, which is that you can make partial Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash transactions that only specify the output, the destination, and you can put multiple pieces of them together, each one of them signed, but they will not be valid until together the input amount is equal or greater than the output amount, aka the campaign is filled. So, people can put in partial transactions. They will not be valid on their own, but only through the combined powers of all their inputs will they be valid. Yeah,
Very
that's
cool.
basically how it works.
And that does in Flipstarter's current form have or it introduces a couple of limitations. Is that right?
Yes, the limitations is mainly coming from the fact that transactions cannot be arbitrarily large. In fact, standard transactions right now can only be 100 kilobytes per piece. That is the most widely relayed size that's common on the network. People have been asking, well, the simplest way is therefore to raise that, right? Raise that. Well, you can raise that to 1 megabyte to 1 megabyte without touching the consensus, and you might even raise it beyond, but that limit was there for a reason. That limit was there to make sure spam attacks that burdens wallets are harder to pull off. So there are trade-offs there. So for now, that 100 kilobytes limit is staying, and so Flipstar each Flipstarter collaborative funding transaction is limited to about 600 something inputs, and because of that limitation, you can only have a limited number of inputs, and so for each campaign there are usually some minimum amount below which it will not accept. There are clever ways to slightly wiggle around that, but there will always be a minimum.
And just in case anyone hasn't quite followed along, the reason there's a minimum is because if you have a total amount that you need to reach and a maximum number of pledges that can make that happen, at least the simplest approach would be to make it so that each post or each pledge cannot be smaller than 1/600th of the total amount. And like Imaginary mentioned, there are clever ways to work around that. But in addition to workarounds, there are, well, maybe not even plans, but there are ideas to make the Flipstarter type funding mechanism work without that limitation using things like smart contracts. Is that right?
That is correct. There are some fairly high-level concepts of using covenants that's enabled by Bitcoin Cash's unique, fairly unique check data sig opcode, which allows us to do clever operations like, you pledge some coins, then one can construct a refund transaction that specifically just automatically refunds back to where it comes from. That is possible, but in order to make it useful to get around the limit, we will need to construct complicated versions of it that are nested. Basically, there are no free lunch. You can't pack more information. You cannot pack a lot more information into a transaction magically just by saying the magic words smart contract. But if we have a nested version of it, then it seems possible to us, at least, to pack a lot more just by having many transactions that are linked to each other. But that is really complex. That's why it has not been built yet. And the Flipstarter team are very capable, but they also all have their primary obligations elsewhere. So that's why it got to a place where it's good enough, and then we put it there, and progress has been slower on that front.
Sure. Well, I think it's great that it got made in the first place and got in a working state so quickly, which is exceptional. And obviously, it's been used to great success. And before we get into that, I wonder if you could give us just an idea of what was the situation like that inspired Flipstarter as both as an idea, but then maybe also like if it was a separate instance, then what really catalyzed people getting it moving.
Right. So aside from the fact that even the very, very original version, which upon closer examination, you can see that it has some user experience problems, etc., etc., that prevented it from getting very widespread. The original Micron version was also intended to fund projects. Flipstarter specifically came after the IFP controversy, which is earlier in 2020, when ABC immediately after. Well, there was an earlier version in BTC.top when people were, where there was a proposal to redirect some Coinbase rewards from mining towards development. The original version was basically to have that funding go towards a Hong Kong company, and then later Bitcoin ABC, then a prominent developing team in Bitcoin Cash came out with their own version and actually implemented it despite a lot of opposition into the Bitcoin ABC codebase, which basically specified that funding will go from Coinbase rewards to just a bunch of people they handpicked, and that drew a lot of controversy. The rationale behind that move is that, well, infrastructure is a kind of common goods, and nobody's paying for it. Well, what do? Somebody needs to do the work, and those people doing the work needs to be paid for it. Well, that's why we just modify the consensus, modify the distribution, and then if nobody wants to pay for it, we will just grab it from the protocol and then pay ourselves. End of story. I felt that instead of changing the whole distribution and possibly, the very nature of Bitcoin itself, to solve this problem of infrastructure people not. Infrastructure people is not by no means limited to Bitcoin ABC, but a lot of other people not getting paid and the common goods not getting funded. There must be another way, and then if you look closer, you would realize that it is not the case that people don't want to pay for common goods. They just don't. A lot of times, if you want people to pay for something that happens to also benefit other people, they're fine with paying for it as long as they get back more than what they paid into it, right? So so if that thing is really cheap to perform, then they will just do it. They don't have to ask anyone else. But the problems will arise if they don't feel that is the case. Oh, this thing is really expensive and I cannot pay for it myself. I would totally lose out on it, and then other people would just what they call free ride on it. This is bullshit. I'm not gonna sacrifice my own wallet for this. But what if you can enter a contract, an assurance contract even, and get other people to also pay for it, or else it's not going anywhere. People have tried it before. I don't think they tried hard enough. I don't think they are going the right way. Let's try this again. And this is basically how Flipstarter was born. And the hypothesis is that people will be willing to pay for things that benefits the commons, if only they are offered a good enough way to collaborate so that it fits each of their self-interest. And so the rest is Flipstarter. A lot of people, interested people, came in and together developed Flipstarter, and funds were raised. So, yeah.
They certainly were. So maybe you could tell us just a little bit about the first couple of campaigns that were run. The first one was a test campaign for BCH, right?
Yes, the first one was basically a technical demonstration that was run for eBCH. The amount was but not very high. It was I remember it was like 20 BCH. Um, that was run for eBCH as a technical demonstration, and that was fulfilled in like less than a day. So that was pretty successful. And then came the meat, which is the full node campaigns, because this whole IFP business, this whole Coinbase redirection business, came from the desire of one specific full node team to get paid. So, well, let's run campaigns for the full nodes, and not just one, not just two, um, but what's the um, but a but ABC, BCHN, um, Newt, BCHD, um, all came up and ran their own campaigns, and Verde. So
Right.
yeah,
And Verde, yeah.
so many teams came up, and some got funded, some did not. But I think it demonstrated that people are willing to fund campaigns if you give them a good proposal. You tell them what you're going to do and how it's going to benefit them, and you ask for a reasonable amount, and you give them a good way to collaborate with each other. I think that's the take home. Yeah.
And that seems like a reasonable point worth bringing up, is that it's not the case that assurance contract, magic wand gets waved and then poof, everybody's funded, right? There was an expectation set pretty early on that Flipstarter campaigns would have to be very thorough in
Yes.
describing their plans for the funds, and also why you should trust them, wasn't there?
Yes, exactly. People need to remember. So a lot of people later kind of forgot about this fact. But assurance contracts or flip starters, it's not an ATM out of the vacuum. Behind this are people who pledge real money, real coins towards each cause. And to in order for people to take money out of their pockets and fund you, you will have to persuade them. That is the that is the basis of the whole voluntary funding model. It's voluntary. People willingly take money out of their pockets, and the reason to get people to willingly take money out of their pockets is that you have to persuade them, instead of having the protocol just take the money out of their pockets when they're not looking. That's not the way to go. So the way to persuade people generally is that you have to present a good enough case and a good enough price to convince them that, okay, I take this amount of money out of it, it's also good for me. That's usually how it goes. So yeah, Flipstarter just provides a way to solve the coordination problem. The actual persuasion still have to go on.
Right, absolutely. And recently it's been framed, at least by some, as though you have two choices. You have IFP or you have Flipstarter. But Flipstarter is only one of many possible voluntary funding models, isn't it? Or even business models.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there is sponsorship, which is starting to take place in a small way, as far as I can tell. General Protocols, a startup that's doing smart contract financials on Bitcoin Cash, is giving out small sponsorships towards maintaining the tools that it uses, the open source tools. So that is one way to do it. And there are probably other ways too. Direct donations might fit some projects better than Flipstarter. That can happen. And people have devised several different ways to get resources for their projects over the time. But I would say that at the root of all this is that it has to be voluntary, instead of just just taking instead of just taking and say that, well, you don't give me money, I'm just gonna take it. No. So I think that is the common theme among all the methods to fund projects that is not IFP.
Oh, sure. I see what you're saying. So, if we were going to make a dichotomy of IFP versus something, it's not IFP versus Flipstarter. It's IFP versus voluntary funding, or you could even just say voluntary interactions that happen to involve money.
Yes.
Sure. And so far, Flipstarter, even after the full node campaigns, it's been put to use by various other projects, hasn't it?
Yes. So originally, when a bunch of us came up with Flipstarter and then people contributed to it, we were not very sure. Our hypothesis was very conservative, which is that people will be willing to at least put money towards funding the very essentials of infrastructure, which happens to be full nodes, and that maybe includes some essential pieces of coin management tools, such as, say, the Electron Cash wallet. But that those things we are optimistic about. We were a lot less sure about other things, including things that also benefit the common goods, like adoption goals and auxiliary tools that are developed by some of the full node teams, and so on and so forth. There was a lot of campaigns. I couldn't just keep track of it off the top of my head. So we were a lot less sure about that. But then, those campaigns were ran, and there were quite a bit of enthusiasm about some of them, and some of them got funded really quickly. Even, we were kind of surprised too. But it tells us that apparently there is interest among pledgers to also fund things that are beneficial to the commons in the broader sense, instead of just strictly the essential infrastructure. So we're happy about that. We'll see how that goes.
Sure. And some people almost inevitably have tried to draw parallels between folks funding Flipstarter campaigns and the potential for corruption or getting bought out, and calling back to the BSV situation. Could you just speak a little bit about why that's not an applicable comparison in this case?
Right. So, one very important thing to note about Flipstarter campaigns is that each project has a set goal, and just because somebody got there first in terms of funding doesn't mean that other people will not step up. It just means that some people step up first instead of others. So, especially for campaigns that are really diverse in sources. One very good example was BCHD, which, if we go back to their page, there are a lot. It's made up with a lot of pledgers, and also BCHN. If somebody did not step up, chances are someone else would step up. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that, I believe the most important thing is that Flipstarter campaigns are raise funds for a specific project. So, socially speaking, people are not accountable to this one guy or this other guy who pledged to the project. They pledge to the project because they want to see what you told them to happen. You listed it, you wrote about it, it's time you make it happen. So they are only accountable to what they wrote in their project description. Instead of having some backdoor deal with some guy in these, there are projects who do that kind of thing. Their funding sources are unknown. It's totally not up in the open. It's transfer. It's allegedly transferred through fiat to some bank account that we don't know is not even on the blockchain. We don't know where it comes from and where it goes to. Um, I think those models have a lot more potential for corruption than the totally open and collaborative and fairly accountable Flipstarter. So, yeah.
Sure, and I think it's really important to remember that, like you said, the projects were defined beforehand, and so, it doesn't matter how much you disagree with, say, the opinions of someone who gave the money. It was just money from them, and it really should in no way affect your opinion of the project itself, right?
Yeah.
Sure. So before we wrap up, I'd just like to point our listeners and viewers to flipstarters.bitcoincash.network. And we didn't dive in a lot to the different projects that have been funded, but you can see them all there. You can sort, or you can go to a page specifically for all the completed projects. You can see everything that's currently running. So if you're curious what specifically this tool has been used to do, please definitely check it out there. And one last thing, actually, now that I think of it, before we wrap up, could you just explain to people? So Flipstarter is not actually really a platform, is it? Like Kickstarter, where you sign in and you use their servers and their account. So could you explain how that works?
Right. So Flipstarter right now in its current form is an open source tool software. No part of it is actually what we traditionally call a platform, where you have people who you have dedicated personnel who accommodates your campaign, and then they act as gatekeepers and say, oh, this campaign comes up, this campaign can run, and that campaign will not run, and so on and so forth, and then they promote it, with you. No, that is not the case. It is open source software. Everything from hosting the campaign website to the campaign backend, to the pledging client tools are all just code that people download and run themselves. So yeah, people have some. There are some very easy to run implementations of this software, like the excellent DigitalOcean integration that Quarantine has built, which basically make it a 10-minute click and deploy kind of thing. But essentially, you are still doing it off your own hosting. Nobody is gatekeeping anything for you. So.
And in addition to having complete control and knowing that no one can shut you down, removing that middleman also makes it so that there are no fees, are there? Unlike on places like Kickstarter.
To be fair, there are minor fees, but Bitcoin Cash being Bitcoin Cash, that is very minimal.
Sure. And in case anyone misheard that, there are minor fees, which are very minor, but we're referring to
yes.
the maintainers of the Bitcoin Cash network, MINERS, as opposed to small. But the fees themselves are indeed very small, and of course borderline negligible, to the point where it's almost not even comparable to.
But yeah, basically it's the same fee that you pay for any other Bitcoin Cash transactions. It's not a Flipstarter fee or anything.
Sure. Very cool. Well, Imaginary Username, thank you very much for joining me to talk about this exciting new piece of the Bitcoin Cash puzzle.
Oh, and before we wrap up, I just want to also give a shout out to members of the Flipstarter team who were basically doing all the heavy lifting. Jonathan Silverblood, Emergent Reasons, Dagor, Sploit, Leandro DeMarco, and quarantine. And all the people who contributed to all the campaigns, they were the real MVPs in giving voluntary funding model a shot, and also people who promote the campaigns, people who help edit the campaigns so that they are legit and convincing, and people who translate the campaigns. There are a lot of people who contributed to the success we have so far, and that is awesome.
Absolutely. So credit goes out to everyone we've named and anyone else who's been a part of the process. And to our listeners and viewers, thanks very much for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on YouTube and to hit that bell icon to be notified of new uploads from Bitcoin Unlimited.